Hello and welcome to lecture number 43. This is topic 3.8, Lifting as We Climb, Uplift Ideologies in Black Women's Rights and Leadership. There are two learning objectives. The first one says to describe strategies for racial uplift or social advancement proposed by African American writers, educators, and leaders at the turn of the 20th century. The first of the leaders we're discussing is Booker T. Washington. He was born in slavery in 1856. When he was growing up after slavery ended, he worked menial jobs and learned to read and write at local schools. He eventually pursued further training and studied at the Hampton Normal and Agricultural Institute, which was an educational institution designed to give African Americans training in industrial jobs, helping them become more skilled workers. As a result, Washington became a staunch advocate for industrial education and training after the abolition of slavery. He believed this was the best way for African Americans to gain economic equality with whites. He saw vocational education as the path to economic independence, especially in the South where the economy was largely agricultural. Washington's ideas were rooted in pragmatism, given the hostile racial climate following Reconstruction, which had ended in 1877 with the withdrawal of federal troops from the South, leaving African Americans vulnerable to racist laws and violence. Because Washington's strategy emphasized economic self-reliance without directly challenging racial segregation, it was generally well received by white politicians and donors. His approach aligned with the desires of the white Southern elites who supported a social order that allowed black people to improve economically but remain politically and socially subordinate. As a result, Washington was tapped to start the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama in 1881, which provided industrial training. The Tuskegee Institute became a model for black vocational education, training students in advanced farming techniques and skilled trades. It also served as a symbol of black self-help during the Jim Crow era. One of the most famous people to come out of Tuskegee was George Washington Carver, known for his agricultural innovations, particularly his various uses for peanuts. Washington gained national influence through his speeches and used the Tuskegee machine to promote black causes. The Tuskegee machine referred to Washington's network of supporters and influence, which helped secure federal jobs and resources for black people, though often at the cost of political activism for full equality. Washington's conservative approach, which emphasized working within the confines of segregation, contrasted sharply with the growing push for civil rights that would eventually lead to the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Washington's prominence was so significant that he was invited to the White House by President Teddy Roosevelt in 1901. Becoming the first African American to dine there. This was a groundbreaking moment, but it also highlighted the intense racial divisions of the time, as Roosevelt faced significant backlash from Southern white leaders. Roosevelt, despite his progressive reputation, distanced himself from Washington after the dinner due to political pressure, a reminder of the fragile nature of racial progress in that era. The other leader we're discussing is W.E.B. Du Bois, who acts as a foil to Booker T. Washington. Unlike Washington, Du Bois grew up in a predominantly white community in Massachusetts and had access to a public education. He went on to study at Fisk University, a historically black college, and later became the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard in 1895. This achievement was a milestone in American history, symbolizing the intellectual potential of African Americans in higher education. His doctoral dissertation, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, 1638 to 1870, became a widely read work in the study of African American history. Because of his educational background, Du Bois championed higher education, particularly liberal arts education, as essential for the advancement of black people. He promoted an end to discrimination and disenfranchisement, calling for immediate federal action to guarantee black American civil rights. In his 1903 book, The Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois introduced the concepts of the color line, the division between races in American society, and double consciousness, the inner conflict experienced by African Americans who see themselves through the lens of a prejudiced society. The book critiques of racial inequality and its exploration of the black experience in America became one of the most foundational texts of African American literature and social thought. Du Bois also developed the idea of living behind the veil, where African Americans can see white society clearly, but white society remains blind to the true experience of black Americans. He believed the responsibility for black advancement lay with an educated elite, which he called the talented 10th. This group, comprising of the best educated and most capable African Americans, would lead the fight against racial inequality. Du Bois's belief in the talented 10th reflected a broader debate within the Black community about whether the progress should come from the top down, via educated leaders, or from a grassroots effort. In 1905, Du Bois helped found the Niagara Movement, which opposed Washington's Tuskegee machine. The Niagara Movement advocated for the immediate end to discrimination, disenfranchisement, and lynching in the South. This movement was one of the earliest civil rights organizations in the United States and would later eventually pave the way for the NAACP, founded just a few years later. In 1909, Du Bois co-founded the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. This leading organization advocated for civil rights in the United States. He became the editor of the NAACP's publication, The Crisis, which attacked racism and advocated for racial equality. By 1914, The Crisis had 30,000 subscribers, far outstripping the NAACP's membership of 3,000. Washington's most famous speech was the Atlanta Exposition Address, delivered in 1895. In this speech, he famously used the metaphor of a vessel lost at sea asking for water from another vessel, which advises it to cast down your bucket where you are. In this metaphor, Washington told African Americans to remain in the South, seek industrial education, and achieve economic equality before pushing for full social and political rights. This Atlanta Compromise marked a significant moment in the racial politics of the time, as it offered a path of accommodation to the oppressive social order of the South. Du Bois, in The Souls of Black Folk, denounced Washington's approach, calling it accommodationist, and arguing that it consigned Black people to a permanent second-class status. Washington countered these criticisms through the media, sometimes using spies to monitor Du Bois's Niagara movement. This rivalry reflected deeper divisions within the African American leadership of the time. Washington's more conservative, gradualist approach versus Du Bois's insistence on full and immediate equality. In the long run, Du Bois's vision for full civil rights for African Americans proved to have a more enduring influence, as it emphasized the fundamental principle that civil rights should not be earned, but granted as a matter of justice. This lecture also covers Black women's education, suffrage, and activism. Social clubs for Black women began to form in the late 19th century and soon took up issues of equality. For example, the Colored Women's League of Washington, D.C. was founded in 1892, and the New Era Club in 1893. These early organizations became the backbone of a growing movement for Black women's rights and racial uplift. They provided a platform for women to address issues like poverty, education, and discrimination. In 1896, the National Association of Colored Women, or the NACW, was founded, with suffragist and educator Mary Church Terrell as its first president. The NACW's motto, "Lifting as we climb," symbolized its goal of helping to uplift all African Americans, especially women, while improving their own status. By 1914, the NACW had grown to 50,000 members. Their activism was particularly critical during a time when African Americans faced increasing disenfranchisement through Jim Crow laws, especially after the 1896 Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson, which legalized racial segregation under the doctrine of separate but equal. The organization's focus on education, healthcare, and suffrage was a direct response to the challenges posed by such oppressive laws. One of the co-founders of the NACW was Nannie Helen Burroughs. She was an educator, suffragist, and church leader. She delivered a famous speech in 1900 titled "How the Sisters Are Hindered from Helping," which explored the intersectional challenges faced by Black women who were discriminated against both for their race and gender. Burroughs also founded the National Training School for Women and Girls in Washington, D.C. in 1909, which was one of the first schools to develop a curriculum centered around Black history. Burroughs' efforts reflected a broader trend in the early 20th century of Black educators developing schools and curricula that highlighted the contributions and history of African Americans, a precursor to the Black history movement that would take shape later in that century. The arts also played a crucial role in uplifting African Americans. Writers and artists from this era, such as Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, contributed significantly to cultural pride. Harper was a poet and novelist, and she was a pioneering African-American female writer who published works like Iola Leroy, which addressed the experiences of mixed-race women during and after slavery. Watkins Harper also published an 1854 collection of poems titled Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects. She started as an abolitionist during the Underground Railroad as a conductor, and she also helped co-found the NACW in 1892. Meanwhile, Scott Joplin, the famous ragtime composer, gains national fame with pieces like The Entertainer. The cultural achievements of artists like Joplin and Harper helped lay the groundwork for the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s, a period of unprecedented artistic and cultural expression of African Americans. Finally, James Weldon Johnson was another multi-talented figure. He was a lawyer, a teacher, a diplomat, writer, and civil rights leader. He published The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man in 1912. It was a landmark novel about racial identity. It was one of the first to explore the themes of passing, when African Americans would present themselves as white to escape racial discrimination, a theme that would also resonate in later works of African American literature. Johnson became the first black executive secretary of the NAACP and was responsible for expanding its membership. He also composed the poem Lift Every Voice and Sing, often referred to as the Black National Anthem, which became a symbol of resilience and hope during the Civil Rights Movement. Some of the themes of Uplift are present in this poem as shown on the screen. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. The second learning objective is to describe the ways that Black women promoted the advancement of African Americans. One of the main avenues was through the women's suffrage movement. Ida B. Wells Barnett, already known for her anti-lynching activism, became involved in this movement, founding the Alpha Suffrage Club in 1913 in Chicago. When black suffragists were told to march at the back of the 1913 Washington, D.C. parade to avoid offending Southern politicians, Wells Barnett refused and marched at the front. Her activism in both the anti-lynching and suffrage movements made Wells Barnett one of the most prominent black female leaders of her time, and she is now remembered as a pioneering figure in both causes. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper also wrote extensively about suffrage, emphasizing its importance as early as the 1860s. She argued that the right to vote was a crucial protection for black women against discriminatory policies. The passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920 granted women the right to vote, but black women in the South continued to face disenfranchisement due to Jim Crow laws until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. Next, we'll look at the role of black women in the workplace. Black women often worked as domestic servants, laundresses, and seamstresses, contributing significantly to their family's income. They were crucial because black men were receiving lower wages than white men were, and so therefore a two-income household was more important for a black family to continue to survive. Since a higher percentage of black women worked, they were also more likely to get involved into the labor movement. In Atlanta in 1882, over 3,000 black laundresses went on strike, forming an informal labor union called the Washing Society, which became a significant labor movement. Laundresses banded together to try and set a uniform price of $1 for every dozen pounds of laundry. They were eventually successful and made headway in getting their white customers to value black labor. Lucy Parsons was another labor leader. She co-founded the Industrial Workers of the World in 1905, advocating for workers' rights across racial lines. Parsons' work in the labor movement exemplified the intersection of race, class, and gender issues that black women had to navigate in their fight for equality. And to bring added complexity to this issue, Parsons primarily identified by her class status rather than her racial identity. Black women were also active in church organizations, which allowed them to take on leadership roles. They worked out of the two more traditionally black churches, that would be the AME Church and the National Baptist Convention. In the National Baptist Convention, Nannie Helen Burroughs founded the Women's Auxiliary. Through these groups, church women were trying to counter racial and gender stereotypes that normally saw them as inferior, incapable, or morally corrupt. In media, they were normally portrayed as mammies from the time of slavery or as Jezebels who were sexually permissible. Therefore, as part of their work, they were trying to promote their dignity, their capacity, beauty, and strength of the black women. They emphasized education as a key to uplift and also promoted virtuous movements like temperance, which is the banning of the sale and consumption of alcohol. All right, finally, here's the recap. Booker T. Washington advocated for industrial education to achieve economic equality, while W.E.B. Du Bois championed full social and political equality through liberal arts education. Black women activists like Nannie Helen Burroughs and Mary Church Terrell worked to uplift the black community through education, activism, and the arts. Arts and literature helped foster cultural pride, and black women played a crucial role in the suffrage movement, the labor movement, and church activism, all of which helped rebuild and strengthen black communities after slavery. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the next lecture, click the thumbnail on the screen. And if you would like more resources to help you study, you can visit apushlights.com/AFAM. I wish you the best of luck with your studies, and I hope to see you back on the next lecture.